Welcome back to Financial Fridays. This is the day that we talk currency fluctuations and how we should be setting our budget and setting the threshold for your currency, anything to do with money and living in the Philippines and not feeling like you need to go when things start to mellow a bit there. All from a financial side. Let's get at it. Today I'm going to cover off some of what Lynn is going to go into way more detail on, and that is plans that the Filipinas and Filipinos and families, and if you're married to a Filipino, some programs you can even avail if you're not married as a foreigner. So we will be covering, or Lynn will be covering in more detail, the SSS, the PhilHealth, Pag-ibig, and St. Peter. Don't forget about St. Peter. And I'm going to cover them from a foreigner standpoint today. What are you going to do if this old carcass passes away in the Philippines? Now, Linda again is going to go into more detail on that. Watch for that upcoming video. But the basic thing is, in my research, and I've looked at Canada, US, and it appears that the parliamentary countries of the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand are all fairly similar. Now, the one thing that you will need to check in on is, does your country accept the whole carcass back? You need to find that out. Financially, returning a cremated person is much, much cheaper. But we all have to take into our personal, religious, etc. Requirements, desires, okay? So I'm going to go into what my desire is, and that is that my ex-wife, my kids, Lynn, my sisters, and etc. all understand I don't care where I die. Cremate me. I don't care what you do with my ashes. That's all going to be up to you guys, whether I get returned to Canada, if I die in the Philippines, etc., etc. Okay? Now, I had, excuse me, rented lips. I had a daughter that passed away many, many years ago. And so it's always been my desire not to worry about where my ashes are, but just to add a simple plaque to her plaque. And my ex-wife wants to do similar. I don't think her plans have changed at all. So that's kind of the goal here from my perspective. But let's think about it. Living in Angolese, we ran into a lot of foreigners. And not all foreigners have got good standing with their family back in their host country, etc. And from everything that I read, it will be up to the family, up to your estate, etc., as to how your remains are going to get back to the Philippines or back to your native country. So this could be shouldered upon your family to have dealt with. Now, I have also run into where, you know, the friends have all had to start raising money to try and get a cremation done for a buddy, okay? So think about the St. Peter plan. I think it's worth the money when you consider that a full cremation relative to a plan is substantially higher, okay? So something to think about. Now, one thing that I want to start covering on today is going through these thresholds again. I would really like you guys to understand a little bit more about the budgeting side of living in the Philippines. To me, it's pretty straightforward, but I've lived there for 10 years. I would like you to set a budget. Now, setting a budget when your currency is not of the Philippines, it gets a little bit harder to work that out, okay? But in all seriousness, now is the time in your life where you're going to have to set a budget and not think that everything is a lottery just because the currency rates go up, okay? So here's what I would suggest. I still feel that a doable amount of money in the Philippines in pesos is 60,000 pesos. You are going to need more money than that initially to get started. So you're going to need a fair chunk of change, more than what it's going to cost you to fly there to get yourself the furniture and all of that type of thing. I will link our end card to the furniture pricing that I went through just recently. So it's more up to date on the current costs. But you need to set that budget of 60,000 pesos. So as I said in one other video, your pension, boop, pretty static. Wherever you're living in the world, it doesn't matter. Your budget and your rent and your food is pretty static. Boop. The one thing that's going up and down like a yo-yo, and the one thing that is gonna, I can guarantee it, Canadians and Americans, a few years from now, when that currency drops below its threshold, because it's going to, and now you can't get that 60,000 pesos anymore. Okay, now, if you've got a $3,000 a month pension, hey, everybody loves you, right? But that's not usually the case. Okay, so you need to work within those thresholds. If you decide your budget is 80, 90, 100,000 pesos a month, that's fine, great. But if you want to be able to maintain that, can you maintain it if it goes below the thresholds? Okay, so the currencies, yes, they have a nice medium level. The US dollar is about 50. The Canadian is about 40. And in front of the ticker, I put the threshold numbers that I feel for your currency. That's all fine and dandy. But in the moment, when your pension is arriving every month, it's not arriving based on that static amount. That static amount is multi-years to work out what that threshold is. So be aware of that, guys. I really can't drive that home enough. And you're quite often seeing this message every week. And so I will keep hammering home on this one. And all of you newbies, heed that warning. Be careful. You do have to save. And as I mentioned earlier, Pag-ibig, PhilHealth, all of these things start coming into play if you're going to be living there long term, and if you get married, etc. Then there's actually some advantages. You can start availing of savings programs in the Philippines that actually have fairly good rate of returns through Pag-ibig. Today's currency outlook is actually pretty good. The Canadian is still hovering around that 43 plus range. The US dollar is still struggling to get to the 25-year high, but it is banging pretty hard on it. It recoiled a little bit today to break below the 57 mark, but still pretty good. So if you've got extra cash, now's the time to send it. And let's say you send it and you get 57. What are you doing, guys? You're saving that 7-to-1 ratio. You're taking that 7 pesos and you're saving it. Please save it, guys. As mentioned earlier, I run into so many foreigners because we lived in Angeles for a long time. And when that currency breaks below 50, a lot of people end up leaving. They go back to their native country. And that's unfortunate because that's just a budgeting error on my way of thinking. Right now for 57, I see a lot of people citing, hey, I can get new furniture, I can get a new TV, my rates are a little bit above and all that sort of thing. Save for those rainy days, guys. Australia, New Zealand, euro, pound, all hovering right around your thresholds, which is good because as time goes along here, you're apt to see things breaking to the top side. What else can I say here? The policy issues in the Philippines, when they start to get going, and some of the international economic groups that monitor countries all over the world, once they start seeing some policy, and they see the policy as being positive for the world, the peso will start to strengthen. Now, one of the things I really want to talk on, and I've got to dive into it a little bit more here, but we're all doing the yeehaw, our currency rates are doing really well. But If this keeps up for too much longer in the Philippines, you could start seeing runaway inflation like we've seen in some other third world countries. And do we want to be living there if the economy starts running away? Okay, so it's a double-edged sword on seeing these currencies get too high, guys. It really is. You have to be conscious of the fact that you want to live in the Philippines. So don't be too elated because somewhere along the way, things come back to roost, right? So let's get into hoping that they get some policy going and that things start to improve for the peso a little bit so that we don't get any runaway inflation there. Okay, guys, that's a wrap for today. If you like it, like, subscribe, and as Lynn would say, punch that subscribe button.